I'm here today with Mars, who is a YouTuber and a podcast host. So, Mars, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. So your YouTube channel is really interesting, and your podcast as well, because you cover like a lot of the gender issues, trans issues,
Mhm.
but really from with a nuanced perspective. Like I've noticed you talk to a lot of people who have different views, and you're not sort of just on one box in terms of the opinions that you're presenting. So,
Mhm.
what kind of led you to create this channel, and like could you give us a bit of background on you and how you got to the point where you're making all this
Yeah.
content?
Um, I would say I honestly don't remember how I stumbled on Twitter, but I think that's where it starts with everybody, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I got on Twitter, and I mean this was, I think, pre-transition or early in my transition. And I stumbled across what I felt like was like some weird war zone between trans people and women mostly.
Mhm.
And I was like, I don't understand why there's so much hate here. And obviously there are people who, are definitely transphobic, but my understanding immediately was that most of these uh, individuals that were getting a lot of hate, women, were really just raising concerns, questions, and perhaps even challenging the ideology behind, you know, being trans. So I got sucked into that pretty quick. And then I took a break, I think around December of that year, because it was becoming a little bit too much. And then I revisited it again. And I haven't stopped since, because I felt like when you go on Twitter, definitely spend a lot of time, it's mentally draining. So I had to step away because I felt like it was affecting my mental health. And then I came back with a different idea, or to kind of, and I say idea as like as far as to discuss these issues. So I came back, I think around December of 2018, with a podcast, and then eventually a YouTube, which has been way better because at least with YouTube, I feel like sometimes I could just do skits and have fun, because the conversation is just so draining when you see so much hate among every side, just back and forth. So it was pretty much just the lack of truth and transparency that gets under my skin still today.
Mhm. Yeah. What are some of the areas that for you really bother you? Like what are the things that get under your skin, would you say?
Um, I would say just like the the lack of, like when we're talking about female sports, this idea that testosterone is the end all, like that's the only way to measure whether or not a trans woman is equal to females is absurd. Like everybody knows that there's more to it. So just the way that they distort these things for your average person who isn't immersed into the dialogue, and they frame it as this, you're anti-trans if you don't believe trans women are women, or you're anti-trans if you don't uh, affirm a child's gender, and so on. And so it's just really, I just don't like the lying. I can't stand it. It makes me sick. Also, obviously, as somebody who was born female, it definitely gets to me to see the not just erasure of what a female is, but the way that females are being treated in this discussion. The lack of courageous men to step up and have their back is also disgusting to me. Just all of it just is really, it's really gross. And it's hard for me to obviously have some of these conversations because I am trans. And so I don't want to, I don't know. I just constantly feel myself stuck between two worlds. Like I'm not trying to take sides. I just want the truth to be discussed and for everybody's rights to be safeguarded. And I don't think that's crazy, but somehow it is considered hateful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, have you been called hateful? Like, is that,
Mhm.
you say you feel like stuck between. I can imagine that's really difficult and that you might kind of do you get it from both sides? Like, do you get shit from both sides?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I wouldn't say I'm well received by most trans people. I don't think that, I think there's a fairly large amount that don't like what I'm saying, most of which it counters their ideology. They also think that I'm feeding this, they think that I'm kind of being used as a pawn by transphobic people, and when they say that, that technically for them means turfs, which I generally try to avoid throwing that out there, but that's basically what they mean. If you don't side with me, or if you don't shut up about this, then you're obviously on that side, and that side hates you. And so therefore I'm someone who they consider to have internalized transphobia, which is pretty funny, but whatever. That's where we're at, you know. So it is kind of frustrating. And on the other end, I'm not gonna sit here and say that somebody who isn't trans and involved in the discourse hasn't been hateful towards me. There's been, you know, some people that have been nasty towards me. However, I would say it hasn't been, for me personally, anyways, it hasn't been the same amount of hate that I get from trans people. But, you know, there have been some nasty people in the discussion. I don't know what their political belief are, but I've definitely been called like, you know, a freak. You know, I've had some women, you know, basically just throw nasty things at me. Like, I don't even remember, but something along the lines of me being raped or me possibly getting raped in the future, and just things that go over the top, you know, that we don't need to go that far to get your point across. But there are people like that. But again, there aren't that many people that are like that. Yet from the transgender community's perspective, that's everybody on the other side. Which again, for me, what I care about and why I keep doing this, because I want the truth to be out there. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It seems like there's such an intense tribalism, like on both sides. I mean,
Yeah.
I know a lot of radical feminists. I don't call myself a radical feminist, but I walk in a lot of those circles. So
Yeah.
I do feel a lot of tribalism. Like, I think it's important to realize that there will have to be compromises made, like all around, you know, not one group doesn't have necessarily like all the answers, or they're not right on everything 100% all the way down. So we kind of have to like listen to each other and figure out that middle ground. But so yeah, like do you feel that like heavy tribalism sort of like pulling you at all?
No. Like pulling me towards to become like very tribalistic.
Like do you feel like
Mhm.
this, like maybe the trans tribe is like trying to make you step in line with them, or like do you feel on the other side, like when you
Yeah.
start conversing with other women, they're like, oh, you have to be 100% in agreement with us, or do you get
Mhm.
that at all?
I mean, I know that there are certain people that call me a traitor for different reasons. I'm either a traitor because, you know, I'm trying to erase my female sex, or I'm a traitor because I'm not regurgitating the same things that the trans people are saying. And so it's like, I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, you can call me a traitor, but I don't feel like I'm being anything but who I am. And I'm saying things that I believe in, or I'm just point blank speaking the truth. So does that make me a traitor? To some people, it does, because yeah, there is a lot of tribalism, which is unfortunate. But I know, for to me personally, like from the transgender, especially online, like, you know, the discourse that happens online on these topics, if it were up to them, yes, of course I feel their energy of trying to either silence me or pull me towards them way stronger than anybody else. Like, that is the goal, you know, and I see this over time. Guests that I've interviewed who either, you know, and again, I don't care if somebody doesn't like me, but they typically, some people who have been open to discuss things with me will inevitably either stop talking at all, or they will completely get radicalized. And that's just what happens. So I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna, like, it is very tricky to not fall into this tribalism, but I think if you just kind of tread carefully and keep, you know, focusing on the truth, I mean, I don't see how you would fall into it, you know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think I've heard you say in one of your videos, like something about how you don't necessarily want to subscribe to a particular ideology, which I found really interesting. So, what does that mean to you, I guess?
So I guess what that means to me is, I guess, like, politically, for example, you know, I've never been too big on politics, and then I got sucked into politics with the whole Trump thing and whatnot. And I found myself, like, 4 years ago or so, going a little bit into the right, or a little bit too much down the right that I wanted to. And so what I noticed in my behavior back then is that I would definitely ignore things that would debunk any beliefs that I was at that moment holding that were right leaning. And so I don't like that version of me. So I try my best not to do that. So when I talk about ideology, I don't just mean like conservative and liberalism, but I mean just also whatever ideology is within, you know, feminism or, you know, the trans community. And I'm not saying that there's anything necessarily, if somebody's a feminist, that's fine. Obviously, you know, there should always be some kind of feminist group because of the way the world works, right? Like females deal with a lot of male violence, so there should always be a group that advocates for female rights. But I've never liked how far people take an ideology, whether it's feminism or whatnot. I don't like that. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
kind of got lost there.
No,
Yeah.
that's okay. It's something that
Mhm.
I'm really interested in and right now, especially because I kind of last summer had like a cancellation experience,
Right.
and it kind of had this effect on me where I almost became like really paranoid about having any labels on me or like any ideology. Like I almost even said
Mhm.
like maybe I'm not even a feminist at all anymore, just in terms of the label, like the definition, the word, not that I believe in women's rights any less, like you said, sort of that the necessary movement, but just in
Mhm.
terms of like having to believe everything that a certain group believes or like a certain ideology. So I am I found a lot more comfort in just like rejecting any ideology and kind of
Mhm.
just trying to make up my mind on like each individual issue when it comes up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting because like I've seen some feminists get upset when other women will use pronouns, for example, you
Yeah,
know, because by using pronouns, that's it. That means you believe the ideology, which to me that's kind of ridiculous. You know,
yeah.
I don't think that should be it. I understand how maybe somebody doesn't want to. I don't necessarily agree, but should that be the key thing that therefore means that you're a traitor, you no longer follow this ideology? And that's, to me, that shows how radical some groups have become when you just fall out of line even a little bit, and that's it, you're done, you're gonna get canceled or chewed out or whatever, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And the pronoun thing is so interesting because I mean, I see like some radical feminists who are just really committed to basically, misgendering every trans person. Like
Mhm.
they'll be out there calling Blair White he, like as if that makes sense, which it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And it doesn't anyway, that's my opinion. Like that doesn't
Yeah.
prove your point.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is like I just because, like, I don't know, I've always separated it from, there's my biological sex, which to me, when I go to the doctor, let's say I go to the doctor and they see on my insurance card, which I haven't changed, it still says female. And a couple of times they'll be like, hey, it says, female. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Because that's really what matters in that moment. I'm going to the doctor for whatever reason, and my biology is female. So why am I going to waste my time? So at a doctor's office, do I necessarily want to be referred to as she, her while I'm at the doctor's office? Not really, but at the same time, is that worth fighting them against? To me, no, because again, I'm there to get help for or whatever, be seen because of my biological sex. So basically just I treat that situation differently. It's unique, and I rarely go to a doctor, so I leave it as is. And I kind of see the whole pronoun thing in that sense. Like when it comes to, you know, uh, statistics or pushing certain things like trans athletes or the prison issue. These are all things that really make a significant difference in your sex. So therefore, I don't care to peddle whatever an ideology within the trans group believes in. I'd rather focus on making it fair and also safeguarding people's rights and getting people the help they need. Um, but to me, it is kind of petty though. If I'm being honest, I feel like it's a waste of time, because you don't have to say it. Like if you don't want to say a pronoun, then don't say it. But to but to kind of like push the a pronoun that somebody doesn't prefer is, I mean, it's just, what's the point? Like if you know that I go by he, him, you call me she, her. I mean, it's just like whatever. Like, okay, if that makes you feel or sleep better at night, whatever. But to me, again, that's taken away from a way larger discussion that we should be having, which is everything I start off with, like the prison issues or the sports issue, not pronouns. However, I definitely see how it's worth arguing or fighting for in terms of pushing some sort of legislation with pronouns, like, making it illegal to misgender somebody. That to me is ridiculous, because everybody's been misgendered at some point, or not. I don't want to say everybody, I guess, but some people prior to this trans explosion in the media have been misgendered prior to us kind of becoming mainstream or whatever, right? Like, there's been butch lesbians, they've been misgendered, yet somehow they survived. So why the need to push it into laws? That's where I'm like, absolutely not. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. And it does get into that petty vibe at times, right? Like for certain things, for sure. And sometimes it prevents us from being able to just have like these open conversations with each other, because people get so reactive and they get emotional on both sides. And then that just,
and honestly,
go
no,
ahead.
and honestly, like, when with the trans community, that is probably the biggest thing for them, like, if not one of them, right? It's language, the way you say things. So if you know that they get triggered by things that you say that they consider harmful, which is basically a lot of what you say, I don't mean you, but just in general, most people, then why use the pronoun thing to get them all worked up? There's no point. You're just feeding into their nonsense, because that's the biggest thing, is like, for them is language. You didn't say they, them, you didn't ask me, you didn't put your pronouns in your bio. You're talking about things that are related to, like, it's all, I don't want to say it's all, but most of it is language. They're really sensitive about words, despite the fact that they will then threaten to kill you or something, in the case of like JK Rowling. Like, doesn't make any sense. But
yeah, that's an interesting point about the emphasis on language. And then it could be equally said in some regards of the other sides of the opponents, because they're putting so much focus on the language too, which
totally,
sometimes it's useful. I mean, I happen to be like a literature nerd, so I also think language is super important and words are super important. But yeah, you make a great point that it does distract, because we have to remember that it's not the substance of it necessarily, because things still are the things they are, like, regardless of how we talk about them. But if we can't figure out like a constructive way to talk about them, then we're stuck.
100%. Yeah, exactly.
Do you think, so I want to ask, like, sort of the reaction that you get from the trans community, but is it fair to say trans community, like, is it that too simplifying it down to one thing? Would you say you feel like you're in sort of like a unified trans community?
It's more like a trans cult, and I'm definitely not a part of it. That's what I would say. Because of the way that they behave, it's totally like a cult. I have to believe a set of beliefs, or I have to be willing to throw certain people on their bus publicly, and then maybe I'll get a hand reaching out to me. But if I don't do any of these things, then there's I'm garbage. I'm nothing to them. So it's very much a cult. And you say this, and they laugh and they scoff and they're like, how, that's ridiculous. But it is, and they can't see it because they're in it. So it's depressing, honestly. Like I said, it's mentally draining. So you have to take breaks. Not necessarily for me, but just in general, people that are in this debate, because it really is mentally draining. It's like, how many times you have to repeat that human beings aren't clownfish? Like, dude, it just it's crazy. It makes you feel, like the definition of insanity. They say, like, repeating the same thing, trying to get a different outcome. It's like, it makes you then feel insane, because you're repeating this 20,000 times and they don't see it. So now you feel crazy, even though they're actually the crazy one. So it's pretty absurd. But yeah, I don't really necessarily feel welcomed or embraced by the community, and it's fine. Like, I don't need it. I have supportive friends and family. That's fine. But it is, the sad part about it is that it will backlash on everybody who is transgender, because the more blatantly obvious they are about how hateful they are towards anybody that challenges their ideology, why would anybody want to affirm you by your pronouns, let alone let you into female spaces? So, I hope I'm wrong, but I just see it backfiring and ultimately hurting my rights, which I obviously don't want that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a scary thing for sure, because as people get more and more emotional, they start to miss out on the nuance, and then they
Mhm.
only see like the bad, like, and then like you said,
Right.
they won't want trans people in women's spaces, or trans women in women's spaces specifically, because
Yeah.
they only see the bad side. Like they don't see the good, they don't see, their eyes aren't open to like the trans women who are just trying to live their lives, and they're not trying to like
Right.
impose
Exactly.
on women's boundaries, right?
Yeah. Mhm. Totally.
What kind of like reactions have you gotten from within the trans world?
Just as far as like the pushback or anything.
Yeah, like what kind of comments or like vibes do you get?
Mhm. Yeah, the vibes that I get is that, I mean, just for example, I did a debate once, which at the time it wasn't supposed to be a debate, but it turned into a debate. It was supposed to be a discussion over a YouTuber, lesbian Ariel Scarcella, whether or not she's transphobic or whatever. And I went into it wanting to understand, which was a huge mistake because it immediately turned into a debate. I felt like I was interrogated the whole time by this very militant trans woman. And so that episode, that live stream that she did, she titled it, a trans woman debates a turf. And I'm like, how does this even make sense? Like I've never been, even before transition, I've never been somebody that was like going around calling themselves a feminist. But now suddenly I'm a hardcore feminist, a radical feminist, and I just don't get that. And again, like this the way they throw turf at it's just supposed to tell everybody that you're evil and transphobic, and it doesn't make sense because I feel like I'm pretty moderate in most things. I'm just not gonna I'm not gonna be very moderate when it comes to medicalization of kids or sports, because to me that is, there's no compromise there as far as I can see, unless we're realistic about these things. But yeah, it just, the pushback that I get is basically the same over and over again. It's just, I'm a bootlicker, I'm transphobic, I'm a turf, I'm a traitor. So thankfully I don't get it every day, but when you do get it, it's at least two to three people coming at you, and it's like, that's so depressing. Why would I sit here, hate myself, and then want to also take out trans rights? Like, that's stupid. So it is what it is, though. Like I said, I can only keep doing what I'm doing, but it does suck, and it is frustrating because, and I'm sure you probably maybe deal with the same things. Like, you can't be involved in the discourse without somebody accusing you of pandering to one side or being a traitor to another side. Like, God forbid we're individuals today. It's impossible. Even if you are, you're just not to most people. They want to box you in because it empowers their ideology.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely. And
Mhm.
I wonder if you could sort of share some of your thoughts on that, the youth transitioning thing. You mentioned that, we're seeing like this real huge increase in
Yeah.
teenage transitioners, female to male transitioners. What are your thoughts around that?
My thoughts are that there it's pretty obvious that there's an issue when there's an increase in females identifying as men. And actually, I was looking at a couple of Twitter accounts yesterday before bed, and something I definitely noticed is this word dysphoric. They throw this word around for just any kind of discomfort. Like, they now see anything that makes them uncomfortable as dysphoric, which is really weird. If you go around and look at these teenagers, the way they talk, well, they're uncomfortable because, I don't know, their dad for a moment showed them an old picture of them when they were a girl, and it's kind of contagious. This goes into the whole ROGD, which I do believe in, because you see the same patterns over and over again. And I've talked to plenty of detransitioners or watched plenty of videos where it's pretty obvious that there's an issue here in how we diagnose gender dysphoria, and how we treat it as a one solution for everybody, which is insane, because the way I've dealt with my dysphoria, which I feel like is more sex dysphoria, is totally different. I hear these stories about why you believe that you're a man or woman. Well, when I was 5 or 6, I preferred boy toys or girl toys. And at no point in my life did I reflect on my childhood and think that was why. I reflected on my childhood and recalled feeling extremely dysphoric about my sex, not I used to be a tomboy and therefore I am trans. Like that idea needs to be smashed. But yeah, I don't know if I kind of trailed off there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in that idea of like the gender dysphoria versus the sex dysphoria, because I also heard you talk about that, and in your interview with Deborah So, you specifically said like you think maybe it should be called sex dysphoria instead of gender dysphoria. That was actually the first time I ever heard that concept.
Yeah.
So yeah, like how do those things differ?
I think that there should be, well, it's kind of like bipolar depression, anything else. There's different levels, right? Some people are severe, some people are mildly depressed. And I think that especially when you look at the males and females and how they have dysphoria and or how they develop it, obviously it's a little bit different. You know, there are a handful amount of biological males that develop dysphoria because let's say they're AGP, autogynephiles. That is way different from my experience and every female's experience. So why would we lump everybody into the same category? To me, it makes more sense to say the way we diagnose dysphoria with males is different from females, and females actually have this, and that, and males have this, because that would not only would it minimize this issue that we have right now with detransitioners, but it just logically makes sense. We're treating females the same way we would treat males, which like a lot of their dysphoria, not every trans woman is like this, but you know, a lot of trans women develop dysphoria because of their, you know, a sex drive, because they're autogynephiles. So, and that's not something I can relate to. I never developed this because, you know, I watched, let's say, a lot of porn or whatever. Like this, I mean, I can't really tell you exactly how I developed it, but I know that's not why. So yeah, I just don't know how we would do that though, because we can't even talk about basic things like what is sex, you know? So how would we even open this door again is beyond me, because they're more focused on the language in the community. That's what they're focused on, and they're focused on destigmatizing. That's it. They don't want to talk about anything else.
Yeah. Where do you think like the conversation should start within that realm? Like you said, you know, they just want to focus on the language and the destigmatization. Yeah. Like if you could kind of like direct it or redirect it, where would you first want it to go, I guess?
I think it needs to go back to what is sex, right? And what is a female and what is male. I think if we start talking about that, then we could move forward. But if we don't even know what sex is, I mean, how is anything going to have meaning or make sense? I would love it but I don't know if this would ever happen. I would personally love to see, somebody like Deborah So debate one of these gender radicals about what sex is, because it's been normalized. It's spreading through schools and campuses, and that's the problem. Because if you're saying that you're changing the meaning of sex and you're teaching a 6-year-old this new meaning of sex, which is insane, then how are we ever going to, I mean, it's going to take a while. Like the longer this debate goes on, the more indoctrinated children are growing up like this. So it is kind of, to me, it's scary, because where's that going to lead us? You know, that's going to lead us like nothing has a meaning, and also the end of female rights as it is.
Yeah, the thing about the kids sort of as they're growing up and learning is really, it is scary, because I think it was maybe Abigail Schreier who I heard saying this, talking about it on, you know, maybe Joe Rogan or some other podcast, saying that kids, you know, they're very young when they start to understand like that's a woman and that's a man and they're different and like what makes them different. But if we're teaching them even before they fully get to that point where that's like solidified in their minds, if we're teaching them like, no, you actually can't tell, like that's what they're saying. There's like, actually, you have no idea what sex someone is based on their external, which sometimes is the case, but not generally. So it's kind of warping their developing understanding of the world.
Exactly. Not generally. Yeah, precisely. I mean, for the most part, you could it's just human nature. We read people by their sex. It's very unlikely that you can't or don't. But even people that sit there and say like, that they even those radical types of trans people do read people's sex. Like they'd be lying if they said that they don't. So
Mhm. What do you think? I mean, obviously, it's impossible to completely like speculate on other people, but what do you think is the driving factor of so many teen girls like saying they have dysphoria and wanting to transition and, do these really intense medical processes, but on such a, I'm not going to say on a whim, because I don't think that anybody would do it on a whim, but for whether it's, like you said, maybe it was because they were tomboy or something that is less related to, I guess, the traditional idea of transgenderism where it's something in your body, right? I guess that's maybe the difference a little bit between sex and gender dysphoria.
yeah,
But yeah, what do you think what's maybe behind this for some of the teen girls?
I think well, I think some of it is how much like the far left or people on the left that are kind of trying to dismantle any sort of traditions. I think that's part of the problem. Like, there's no need. It's okay to break gender norms, but also you don't have to. You don't have to make people feel guilty because they're traditionally a man or woman. And I think that has a part to do with it. But the biggest part is probably the internet, which I didn't grow up with the internet, but I grew up female, so I kind of get it. You go online and everybody is obsessed with how they look. I mean, most, I don't want to say most, but a lot of young girls at least, they love using filters.
Yeah.
If you're growing up using filters and you can't even look at yourself for who you are, then isn't that in a way making you more uncomfortable with whatever discomfort you might have about your body? I would think so. So you're growing up with filters and focusing a lot on your on what you look like, and then you sign off the internet and you go to school and maybe somebody makes a comment about how you look, and now you find that you hate and you're disgusted by the body that you are in, being a female even more. Like, I think that's a huge part of it. I don't think that we could have predicted that the internet would have such an impact on young girls, but also girls are way more emotional than boys. Like, that's a fact. So they're going to, the whole ROGD thing again with the female cluster is like, I 100% do believe that. I heck, I've even seen some YouTubers online that have multiple friends they grew up with or that are also now trans. And so I think the internet, like I said, the internet is a huge part of it. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of jokingly say that, anybody under the age of 21 or 18 shouldn't use the internet. And I say that as a joke, but also, I mean, in a way, I feel like that would solve a little bit of it. I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of shaming. There's a lot of shame in being a female growing up because of society expectations and comments that not only guys make, but girls make. And then obviously you go online and now you could escape. You could become this new person by either throwing a filter on, or you know what, you stumbled across dysphoria, and now that sounds like precisely what you need. You can shield yourself from being a female. Sounds great. So there's a lot of appeal there to young women today because of how society has changed, which, like I said, I don't think it could have ever planned for the internet to impact young girls the way it has, but it has.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Like the filters and the photoshopping. I mean, it's out of control and
Yeah. And
it's
how often do you see guys do filters in the
yeah,
same way?
right. It's
Barely.
barely and
Yeah.
it's almost kind of like uncool for guys to do it.
Oh,
Whereas
totally. Yeah.
yeah, whereas like for girls it's
Mhm.
totally commonplace.
Yeah.
Like do you have, any advice or like if you were talking to a teenage girl who wanted to transition, what might you advise them? Like, yeah, like would you have any
Mhm.
words for them?
Advice. I mean, I don't think it's I don't think it helps to fight somebody on something like that, especially a teenager, because teenagers are going to rebel regardless. So probably the best advice I would give a teenager is it's not that I don't believe what you're saying. I understand how you feel. However, it might help you in the long run if you give it more time, because you might be a little bit, I don't know, too young to decide this now. And then I will probably, I don't know, maybe throw in the fact that I transitioned late in life. And I mean, I've often said, like, would I have preferred 5 years earlier? Yeah, sure. Would I have preferred transitioning at 16? No, because even though obviously ideally I would have preferred being born male, but if I had to transition at 16, I just, knowing how things were when you start taking testosterone, you have to adapt mentally, socially. Like, that's a big change. I don't think a kid is ready for that. I don't think a 16-year-old is quite prepared to do that. And I think it goes to show a 16-year-old isn't ready to prepare for that, but the whole world is going to change for that 16-year-old to prepare for that, which is unrealistic, right? When a teenager goes through these changes through puberty and whatnot, you don't see like a whole entire school system change for that kid going through a hard time. They just have to cope and deal with it. Yet when the kid is 16-year-old trans girl or boy, they're not going to learn how to cope with it in a normal way, this new puberty, because guess what? They're going to get coddled. The whole school is going to accommodate them. And so I know that I kind of answered it in two ways, but that's basically how I see it. And yeah, I would just, again, like, it's not helpful to fight a kid on something. So you could maybe kind of affirm it, but also be realistic in how you affirm it, right? Like, if a kid says, I'm a girl or a boy, you can tell them, I hear what you're saying, but this is, I don't know, maybe explain to them what sex is. And you know what? The cool thing is, at least, that maybe nowadays when you grow up, you could transition, but we're going to wait because we want to be sure. We don't want you to grow up regretting it or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like, when you're a teenager, you do get so stuck in your ways. You don't
Right.
believe
Yeah.
anything the adults say because you're like, I know better. And
Yeah.
it's true that they know better what they feel. I mean, we
Yeah.
have to admit that. Like, we don't necessarily remember exactly what it feels like to be a teenager, although we all went through it. But the thing that also kind of bothers me is, like, when they're putting kids on puberty blockers, they don't have the opportunity to develop their brain and maybe change their mind or just get a different perspective on it.
Right.
And then something that can happen is when they if you've had the kid on puberty blockers, I guess at some point they have to go off of them, and
Mhm.
then they have to go on the cross-sex hormones. But I don't know if there's like a period where they might start puberty if
Mhm.
in the, naturally. And then I guess this would be if they weren't on the blockers. I guess I'm getting it a little mixed up here, but if they weren't on blockers, but they had socially transitioned, and then they start going through puberty, that will like increase the dysphoria, right? Because then all of a sudden it's like super obvious
Yeah.
which sex they are. And then it's this
Yeah.
whole other difficult thing to navigate.
Yeah. The thing with puberty blockers that I never understand is the whole life-saving thing, because with puberty blockers, nothing really changes. You're just hitting like a pause button, as they call it. So if nothing is changing and a kid, let's say a kid is 7, how are you really saving their life by telling them, hey, you're going to go on puberty blockers? They don't even know what puberty is. They're not there yet. So what exactly is changing in that moment for them to be like, yeah, I'm not gonna jump off this bridge. You saved my life. Like, it sounds really bogus to me. It's very different when you say my 60-year-old was very suicidal and then they started transitioning and they felt better. Okay, I'm not saying this is the case for everybody, but I could understand how in some cases that does help because, like I said, something is changing. But in the case of puberty blockers, nothing is changing. You're telling them something and they're taking your word for it, even though they have no idea what puberty is because they're not there yet. So it's ridiculous. And then the other reason is because they want to give the kid more time to explore their gender, as if they can't do that without puberty blockers. It's just the reasoning behind it is bogus. It's also just, it's always been creepy to me. Puberty blockers, you're literally, you're messing with a kid's natural process of going through puberty. That's eerie. We don't know what the long-term effects are, but we know that there are definitely some harmful ones that have come out. Like, it impacts bone density, I believe, and other things. So life-saving treatment that causes some harm. Is it really life-saving? It isn't, yet for some reason, we have to go behind this because again, like the way they frame things, it makes people feel bad. When you say, if you don't do this, your kid's going to kill herself, of course, a parent is going to feel emotionally guilty and cave. And they're going to be like, well, the puberty blockers supposedly are going to save a kid's life, but are they? How do we actually know this?
Yeah, it's a great point. And there's also the element of like, if you went through puberty, you would even maybe be better able to explore your gender because you would start to like have crushes on other kids and you would
Totally.
feel like, who gives me butterflies? And,
Yeah.
what do I feel regarding all that stuff? And you can kind of come into it more. Whereas, yeah, if you're prepubescent, you literally, like you said, you have no idea. You don't even know what puberty is. You have no idea
Mhm.
what you feel about your gender.
Right. Yeah. And it's just also insane, like you were saying, figuring out who you like and things like that. I mean, that's such a big part of a kid's childhood.
Aw.
It's like I hated puberty, absolutely hated it. But also it was a crucial time in my life. It had to happen in order for me to understand myself more. And I mean, I didn't even really fully understand my sexual orientation until like way late in my life. But I did get hints of it right as puberty kicked in. I did find myself attracted to women. And so, that's another problem with this whole puberty blockers is that you're not giving a kid a chance to develop any sort of sexual orientation. The entire focus is on gender identity. And then they grow up realizing, wait, I thought I like girls, but actually I like boys. Hold on. Like, it's like we have to give them time. Time is very important for a kid. There's no need to rush it. And it's honestly, like I said, it's really creepy and it's just depressing because sexual orientation is basically has become meaningless to a lot of these kids. They think they could opt into being a man, opt into being a woman, opt into being a lesbian. Everything is a choice, which is completely backwards when you look at gay rights. It was never a choice, right? And now suddenly it's all a choice.
That's really interesting because, yeah, I have noticed that where it's like, um, some trans activists do talk about it in the sense of it being a choice.
Mhm.
And that sort of puzzled me because I was like, I didn't think that was kind of the idea behind even trans, let alone being gay or lesbian or bisexual. Like you said, it was always like born
Yeah.
this way. And also, it's going to get better. That was another thing that, like, when I was a teenager, they told us it's going to get better. It will get better. And
Yeah.
particularly to gay kids, like the Trevor Project, I think that was their slogan, it gets better.
Mhm.
And now we're telling kids like it will get worse.
Right. It'll get worse. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sucks. I mean, it is hard being a gender nonconforming guy or girl, a lesbian or gay. Like it is hard, but we shouldn't just take that away from somebody because now there's this new thing in the community in the LGBT. I mean, it's like when I reflect, like I try to compare myself to the things I read some of these kids saying. I'm like, I understand how they feel. Like I was that kid. I get it. But at the same time, like I don't know. I feel like even though I definitely transitioned way later in my life, I can sit here and say confidently that I don't have regrets in everything that had to happen throughout my life. It was a part of and is a part of who I am today. But there's really no meaning in much when you can just say, you know what, I'm going to try out liking girls because why not? It's an identity. And of course, like, I know we started off talking about like tribalism and whatnot, but that's the other appeal is, a sense of community. And now you have it. The more identities you have, the more like I don't want to say oppression points, but you definitely get more praise having more labels, right? I mean, I was looking at somebody else's profile. I do this a lot, obviously, but I was looking at somebody else's profile yesterday, and they were complaining about the actress or not actress. She's a singer, Sia. She's getting like canceled or whatever because of a movie that she had like an actor who isn't autistic acting out as somebody who is autistic. So that's ableism. And then somehow I ended up reading about neurodivergent. I was like, what the hell is that? So I looked it up, and I mean, neurodivergent is when you're on a spectrum. You could be ADHD, I think anxiety too. So I was like, so technically, I mean, I could say I'm neurodivergent. So that's another card for me I could use. And it's just like that kind of stuff. It's ridiculous. And again, like these communities are always victims and you need to abide by what they say, make them feel safe. And also, like, the more identities or labels you have, the more you're celebrated, the more powerful you are, despite the fact that you're also a victim at the same time, which is insane. So it doesn't make sense. But that's kind of where we are. You know, it's like we all want to be victims, and also we're all powerful enough to cancel you. It's just, it is what it is.
Mm. Yeah. You had a video about Elliot Page. That was really good, where you sort of talked all about
Thanks.
Elliot's coming out and
Mhm.
yeah, like I mean, there's a lot there, but yeah, what were some of the points that you made, if you don't mind telling people again now?
Yeah. Some of the points I definitely, or one of the points I really wanted to make in that video was the fact that they were making it seem as though Ellen Page suddenly is gone and was never a part of. Sorry, I need to drink water.
Oh yeah, go for it. No, you're fine. Cheers.
I was trying not to, so I didn't want to make you like edit out
Oh
a
no,
whole
you're
lot.
good. I don't need, don't even worry. I mean, I
Okay.
can edit, but you're allowed to drink water, geez. Like this isn't like a Gitmo interrogation.
No water for you. You're gonna talk for 50
Yeah.
minutes straight.
Right.
Okay, so your question. Yeah, okay. So yeah, one of the things that was super annoying right away was you know, Ellen Page comes out as Elliot Page, and suddenly everybody just explodes in celebration, but also in policing everything you're saying about Elliot Page. Do not mention that they were ever born female. Don't mention that they were ever Ellen Page. And that really annoyed me. You know, like I always say, like, you know, congratulations, you're trans. I hope it works for you, but also just because somebody comes out of trans, I'm supposed to just celebrate and ignore who they were or what they're saying politically, you know, which a lot of these celebrities or influencers come out and say these things, you know, again, with the victim card. They'll come out and be like the new hero of the trans community. And I'm supposed to just go along with it. And if I challenge it, then I'm obviously hateful and transphobic, which is very frustrating. But yeah, it's like, I don't understand that. It would be like me sitting here saying, you know, don't ever, and I've never done this to my parents, you know, and my parents, for the most part, they use she, her, referring to me. Now, obviously, depending on what kind of trans person I am, it would either be hateful or just is what it is. And I mean, they're not doing it in a hateful way, but you know, I am in my 30s, so I imagine they lived with certain pronouns for most of their life. They're older. Why am I going to, you know, beat them over the head to say he, him? I'm just not going to do it. You know, at the end of the day, they're happy for my transition because they see that it is something that is beneficial to me, and I'm still able to live my life, go to work, and things like that. You know, and so it's like we build this new persona that somebody gives us, Elliot Page, and that's great. But you know, who played that role? Who was in that movie, Inception? Because that was a great movie. Should I just forget that Elliot Page at the time was Ellen Page, who kissed forget his name? You know, it's like that's what really gets to me. Again, it's a lack of transparency and the lies. It's okay to celebrate somebody today if they come out, but also we don't need to erase history because they are Elliot Page today.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, there was like a very quick rush to
Super
erase.
quick.
Yeah, yeah, it was really fast, right?
Like
And
they changed everything online. I was
yeah,
blown away. I was like, I went to IMDb, everything, Wikipedia, it was just gone. I was like, okay,
yeah,
that's that's pretty fast.
right. And it's like, I don't know, there's something in there where I do wonder if that almost takes away from part of the trans experience. Like if it's like just erasing that whole process, like there was a
Mhm.
change, like because Elliot is trans because he was born female, right? So that's,
Mhm.
I mean, do you feel that is something where that actually starts to erase part of the trans experience?
But what does that even mean, though? That's the other thing too. Like Elliot Page comes out as trans. Okay, so there wasn't much context to it. All they said was pronouns he, they. I'm trans. Okay,
Mhm.
like I mean, there could be so much. Does that mean that you're going to transition? Does that mean that you identify? I actually don't remember if they didn't necessarily say that they identify as a man. I also don't remember if they said they're non-binary, right? I think that they just went with pronouns.
Okay.
So that's another thing that I have an issue with. Somebody comes out as trans, they don't explain anything, but they expect you to basically forget who they were. That's just not realistic, you know? There should be context there. I mean, it's like I don't owe the world an explanation, but if I want the world to understand, accept, and maybe even, you know, hopefully respect me, then I should probably be as authentic and honest about who I am to the world. But we don't really get that with these celebrities. They come out and they're like, you know, the Sam Smiths, like, okay, I'm non-binary. All right, great. What does that even mean? You know, I can never actually get a good explanation of this. I've tried talking to people about this, and you know, on some level, I see it. I see the appeal. Again, going with females, I absolutely understand the appeal to want to opt into being non-binary because being a girl sucks. I get it, but also just because being a girl sucks and you want to be he they doesn't mean that we're not going to have questions. And if you don't like it, then don't come out publicly. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, very like matter of fact approach.
right, yeah,
Doesn't seem to be there a lot today.
yeah, exactly.
So where can people find you online, and where can people find all of your work?
You can find me on YouTube at Upper Hand Mars. If you're not into like videos, I do all kinds of different videos on there, and my podcast I do video, but also I do audio. So you can find me on YouTube at Upper Hand Mars, or if you just want the podcast version, you can find me on Spotify or iTunes or Podbeam at The Mars Show. And that's just interviews that I have with people, or Twitter, Upper Hand Mars. So yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, and I will link all of those in the video description here. And you know, I think it's important for me to watch your videos and hear from all these different trans voices. Like it's really helped me to have a more balanced and less black and
That's
white
awesome.
understanding, I guess. And
Right.
so I really like that you do that. You speak to so many different people. It's really unusual, I have to say. So thank you for coming on here and
Well,
giving
thank you.
us
No,
your view.
it was
And
my pleasure. Oh, thanks for having me on. You know, as somebody who receives so much hate, and apparently you're supposed to be hateful towards me, I feel that you've been way too kind and making me. No, thank you. I'll have to invite you on my channel sometime. It's been a
oh,
pleasure, though.
that
Thank
would
you so
be
much.
fun. Thank you too.
Yeah.